Doctors change lives every day, but what happens when life changes yours? A single injury, a sudden illness. Your career, your income, your future can shift in an instant. The best physicians don't just plan for success, they protect it. At Set for Life Insurance, they believe financial security isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. True own occupation disability insurance ensures that no matter what happens, your future stays in your hands. Because protecting your income means protecting everything you've built. Visit drpodcastnetwork.co/set4life today. Secure your future before life makes the choice for you.
Not a good look for our profession.
How in the name of common sense did this ever get this far? Vaccines are not seek and destroy missions.
Because he was so severe.
This is nuts.
One of the top 20 things that she has discovered with her research company, Progenobiome, medicine has been corrupted. Where we go from here now, I don't know. Well, it doesn't work.
So angry, punishable jail time.
Literally, this makes me believe we live in the Matrix.
Like, deadliest year in U.S. history.
It wasn't a question of if, but when.
This first red.
If it doesn't work and it's safe, put it in a little Fauci Pez dispenser, give it to the patient, and shut the family up.
It's going to get worse and worse and worse.
He gave Fauci an award for being a hero of the pandemic.
This has been a problem.
These were lies.
Let's talk about the healthcare professionals supporting this.
In the meantime, what was going on behind the scenes?
Irony of the whole thing is,
Harvey's 100% correct.
This is freaking annoying.
Ultimately, we need to have hope for America.
What is going on here? What has poisoned your mind? Buckle up, kids.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back again to another wonderful episode of BS Free MD. I'm predicting the future because I know it's going to be wonderful.
Oh, absolutely.
Based on our guest today that's here, but I'm going to read the little intro bio about him. But I just want to say, there's a moment in every parent's life when everything changes. For some, it's the first cry in the delivery room. For others, it's just quietly noticing things, or sometimes noticing a milestone that's missed, or a look that's not returned, and a gut feeling that something is not right and it just won't go away. And then comes the diagnosis. And for too many families in America, that moment is tied to a single word we call autism. So our guest today, Dr. Brian Hooker, didn't come to this story through speculation or theory. He came through science, through data, through years of watching the numbers rise and the public health establishment look away. And Dr. Hooker is the Chief Scientific Officer at the Children's Health Defense and co-author of the New York Times bestseller, Vax Unvax, Let the Science Speak. He's a biochemical engineer by training, a professor emeritus, and a father. And in his view, we are not facing just an epidemic, but a silence so loud it's become dangerous. And autism rates among 8-year-olds have soared 348% since 2000. And that's 1 in 31 children. 1 in 3 of those cases are severe. So the story we're being told, it's all just better diagnostics, better awareness. And Dr. Hooker is here to challenge that narrative and to ask the questions too many in power refuse to face. And what if this rise just isn't coincidence? What if we've been looking the other way for too long? And I know those in science have. So let's talk to them and find out. Welcome to BS Free MD, and thanks for being here with us.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I mean, I have 2 MDs, at my disposal for, the next however many minutes we do this recording. I was going to talk about, see if you could do like a, quick diagnosis on my knee or something. But I'm so excited to be here. And so thankful for what you're doing to wake people up. So it's an honor to be with you.
Well, thank you. So let's start at the beginning. You're a biochemist by training. You taught at a small Northern California university for years and years. Mm-hmm. How did you become this wacky anti-vaxxer working for this crazy guy, Robert Kennedy at CHD?
Well, I grew up in a very, very sort of allopathic medicine, pro-vaccine family. In fact, my mom was a public health nurse, and she was in charge of all the vaccines that were distributed in Riverside County, Southern California, which is about a population of 2 million. And so I grew up with like vaccine brochures, on the kitchen table, by my breakfast cereal. And so when my son was born in 1998, I didn't really know. I mean, I read the brochures and they said how great vaccines were growing up, but I didn't even really know adverse event was a thing. And so we vaccinated him on schedule. He tracked slow. He was a baby that got lots and lots of mercury with his vaccines because of that era, because of thimerosal, the preservative that they were using in multi-dose vials. And then lo and behold, at his 15-month well baby checkup, he was not well. He had an ear infection. And we asked the nurse practitioner there that saw him, is it okay to vaccinate him? He's sick, and the nurse practitioner said, oh yeah, we do it all the time. It's fine. It's okay. And we're like, oh, well, okay. We want to please our doctor, which was really bad motivation, but he ended up regressing into autism so quickly after that set of 3 vaccines, while already, having sort of an inflammatory reaction in his body, that he was diagnosed with autism, full-blown, very, very severe autism by his 18-month well baby checkup, so by the same pediatric practice. So we knew that whatever happened that day was an atomic bomb that went off in his system. And that really started my quest to understand and go down this whole rabbit hole, red pill, whatever you want to call it, to really, really some extremely disturbing conclusions, about what happened to my son, about the vaccination program in general in the United States, the CDC, a captured federal agency, the whole 9 yards. And so that was, really my awakening was 1999, 2000. And, once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. And so I just started, sort of a new trajectory, even for my career in research, to understand better what was going on.
I'm curious because it wasn't that about the time that Jenny McCarthy came out as well about her son having it. Because I remember, in practice, we were hearing that, and we're totally honest and BS free on the show. I remember thinking, oh, that's just crazy Hollywood stuff. It's coincidence, and so I want to know, I'm sure that's what you were told too by the medical professionals that you consulted, because I I don't know who Jenny was seeing, but there really wasn't probably anybody that was looking at this seriously, correct? And how did you start researching this? Because back then, how would you find anything out?
Well, we were fortunate to have an integrative pediatrician see my son when he was 2 years old. It was the first visit with this particular pediatrician. We live in Eastern Washington in the Tri-Cities. And so to have the resource like that in that small of a community was a miracle. But he looked directly at what was going on with my son. He's like, no more vaccines. And,
wow.
At that point, we had made the leap, pretty much in our own hearts, but that really solidified it. And I'm so thankful to God for that moment. We needed somebody with a white coat that said that to us, and they did. And it was so rare back then. And so I started doing research, started looking online, as rudimentary as it was. I get out on Netscape and look for yeah, exactly. But we would look for information, and once I started to see that the CDC themselves were investigating this, then I started to get phone numbers of scientists, and I had letters behind my name. They had letters behind their name. What the heck? I'll pick up the phone and call them. And so I was checking in with these researchers, getting updates, progress reports, reading everything that was published. Barbara Lowe Fisher, DPT, a shot in the dark, anything that I could get my hands on, and then chatting with parents on Yahoo groups, and finding out what happened to their kids.
Right. Well, and I don't think talk about the parents for a second, because I don't think people that have not been personally affected by this understand exactly what happens to some families, where children are literally injected and then within minutes or hours are banging their head against the floor. Like, this is not this, what I call the neurodiversity psyop, where you're a little bit different like Elon Musk and you make rocket ships. I mean, these are profoundly disabled children that need a 100% care for the rest of their lives. So tell us a bit about some of those stories, because that I think has been lost in the noise.
Well, when you look at profound autism or severe autism, you're right. It's about 1 in 3. Autism with intellectual disability, in the latest numbers that came out from the CDC, varies anywhere, among racial groups, in African Americans as like 50% of autism has intellectual disabilities. In Caucasians, I think it's more like 32%, but it's a really, really large number of people if you consider, especially the prevalence of autism in general. But that life looks like, chronic diarrhea, constipation, loss of bowel and bladder control. My son had so many vestibular and sensory integration issues that after he got vaccinated, he refused to walk unassisted for about 3 months. He lost his balance. I mean, we know, and in hindsight, we know now he lost his balance that day, because we spent so much time trying to reintegrate his sensory system. He does not speak, and he has not spoken since those 15-month vaccines. All the words went away. He was babbling, he was speaking, had about 10 words before those shots. And, you hear about these regressions all the way to children that I've heard have regressed into autism that are neurotypical, normally developing until they get their boosters at like 5-6 years of age. So it's not just the babies.
Right.
But your life is no longer your own. My wife and I still, to this day, my son lives at home with us, and we're the primary caretakers. My son gets 3 to 4 hours of sleep at night, so my wife and I do shift work in order, to be able to provide him support, and he has to be monitored every waking hour. Meltdowns, chronic pain, head banging is due to neuroinflammation. And that's a kid in pain that is trying to get some type of relief, or at least some type of displacement of the pain, in order to have some level of control. And then gut pain. My son had a behavior where he was taking his arm and his fist and banging against the side of his body to the point where he had bruises on the left, right, and side of his body because of chronic pain. And, and then the quest to see so many different practitioners to be able to, the worst thing that you can see as a parent is your child suffering. Absolutely the worst thing. And so, the quest for practitioners going from doctor to doctor to doctor, to natural practitioners, to chiropractors, audiologists for sensory integration. And, it really is the nuclear weapon that goes off in your life that continues to blow up every day.
Okay, so to steelman this, as Joe Rogan would say, didn't the CDC come out with a study in 2004 that threw water on all of this business and say, no, there's no connection between, the vaccine, specifically the MMR, and autism? Can you tell us a little bit about that study?
Well, that's a tough one because so many people were so duped and have used that and have weaponized that single study for so many years to use it as a straw man argument to extrapolate it to 16 other vaccines on the schedule. Somehow magically, if you study the MMR, then it applies to the DTaP and the HIB and the Prevnar and the this and that and the other. It's like, I love that science. It's so magical and it saves time. But that alone, is a hole in that whole vaccines don't cause autism thing that you can drive a Mack truck through. Let alone the fact that it was of dubious quality, and that the actual results regarding the timing of the MMR vaccine and autism incidence in several different constituencies. These were kids that were in metropolitan Atlanta that were being studied. Um, Not only was it flawed data, but they took an entire set of their results and they trash canned them, never to see the light of day. So it is a fraudulent study. It is what you're describing is an MMR study. It was the first author was Frank DiStefano. Came out in the journal Pediatrics in 2004.
What about what's his name? William Thompson.
William Thompson was one of the co-authors on that study. And interestingly, one of the scientists that I had contacted originally back in 2001, and at that point, even before the study, I mean, he was blowing me off. It was very brusque. At one point, he said that his daughter got all the same vaccines as my son, and she was just fine, which I nailed him to the wall against. I mean, I think he regretted that for the rest of my life. I think I might have called him a Nazi at that point. So it did not start a relationship on the right foot. But Dr. Thompson was the second author on this study by Frank DiStefano on the MMR. And fast forward to 2013, calls me. I didn't even know he had my number. At 2013, it's like, who are you and why are you calling me now? To start to confess how that study was fraudulent. And he wanted to lead me down a path very, very privately, very, very confidentially on all the studies that the CDC did regarding MMR and thimerosal containing vaccines, so I could really dismantle them and show that, according to the CDC data, there was a strong link between vaccines and autism. It was weird. It was a weird time. Dr. Thompson and I were together in close proximity, talking back and forth on the phone for 10 months. And he showed me literally how to get the data from the CDC, walking through, sort of the front door of the CDC, getting access to these data sets, guiding my analysis, telling me what to analyze first. And then in that process, revealing, how the CDC committed fraud.
Was he in a parking garage in Washington, D.C. with his name Deep Throat by chance?
He was in a parking lot in Atlanta. So, yeah.
It's like he had a total come to Jesus
I
moment. Like, well, I wonder what prompted.
Well, yeah, 10 years of guilt. Yeah. It's amazing how powerful that is.
He really struggled on the inside of the CDC, for the entire duration of when they did that study, when they published that study, tried to warn the director of the CDC, Dr. Julie Gerberding, who put him on unpaid suspension for doing that, and was complicit in the entire cover-up. They presented the information at an Institute of Medicine meeting from the National Academy of Sciences, and they presented fraudulent data. So that Institute of Medicine committee could then go back and say, oh, there's no relationship between vaccines and autism. But Thompson was there in the background, in a cringeworthy position, I don't know why he waited for such a long time, but at 2013, he had had enough. So he called me,
No,
made
it's
up
just,
an
but
excuse,
I
that he
still,
got a wrong number.
I want to put a fine point on this because it is truly stunning to hear this. I mean, we have been going down this rabbit hole. I have read, I don't know how many thousands of hours on this stuff now and kind of re-educated myself. But what you're saying, what Dr. Thompson said to you was it wasn't just this 2004 MMR/autism study. All of their vaccine studies were fraudulent.
When it came to autism and neurodevelopmental disabilities, he said that they were all a fraud. So it was the 2004 DeStefano study on the MMR. It was a 2003 study by a guy named Thomas Verstraeten on mercury, thimerosal, the mercury-containing preservative in vaccines and autism. It was a follow-up study on mercury and autism in 2010. It was another study that Thompson was a lead author on in 2007. And so he really just sort of pulled back the veil in it, and it was quite overwhelming. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was trying to keep this information private because I wanted to know more, as our relationship continued, and he was revealing more and more information to me. And so, I was taking a lot of sleeping pills to sleep because my mind was racing 24/7 during that time.
Wow. And so how far down the hole did you get with this as far as who was the lead in covering up the study?
Yeah. So where are the orders coming from? I think
the lying, the false studies. I mean, obviously, we say follow the money, but follow the trail. Like how far back did you get? Or can you say?
He was really hesitant to say, but the person in charge, on that, specifically the MMR study, was a CDC official by the name of Colleen Boyle. She was head of National Center for Birth Defects and Developmental Disabilities, and she had experience in fraud because she was one of the chief architects of the cover-up regarding Agent Orange and medical difficulties, associated with Vietnam deployment. That's where she cut her teeth. And then all of a sudden she was sort of a vaccinologist, epidemiologist, and she, for some reason, became the head of the developmental disabilities section, which made absolutely no sense. And then she just sort of repeated her fraudulent activities with vaccines and autism.
Okay, so the question,
I was going to ask who that lead in the Del Pig Trees sort of documentary on vaccine, who the lead
I'll remember
scientific
who that is. Oh, that's
position.
that's Stanley Plotkin.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
I was going to ask about
Mm-hmm.
Did anything with him come up at all in all of this?
Not really with Plotkin. He was kind of the father of vaccinology and vaccination, and fortunately, pretty much the entirety of the deposition of him by Aaron Siri, the attorney who works with Del Bigtree, is online. That's really telling.
Right.
To the kind of the depths of depravity that these vaccinology fathers went to in order to get these vaccines tested and approved under really dubious circumstances.
Well, yeah, and I guess the question that everyone is asking, and is why. And like I try to not, I try to live by the axiom of don't ascribe motive, at least negative motive when incompetence will do, because usually people are incompetent. I know Scott Atlas didn't necessarily think that Fauci and Birx were necessarily super nefarious. They were just unspeakably incompetent. I think it's both, but that's besides the point.
Which is even worse.
So I mean, if you're looking at data that is so monstrous that you are recommending, and not just recommending, mandating, because school systems, counties, states mandate these vaccines for public education. that a child gets something that, may give them a 20% or a 10% absolute risk of some kind of neurodevelopmental problem. And there is a spectrum of these. That's clear. As much as I've kind of come against that whole spectrum concept, there clearly is.
Right.
Like that's Joseph Mengele levels of depravity.
It was really hard to look it all in the face, because it wasn't just incompetence. It was an atmosphere within the Immunization Safety Office and within the National Center of Birth Defects and Developmental Disabilities of being untouchable and we can do whatever we want. And I saw that from the fact that there was a Danish researcher who was publishing studies also to indemnify vaccines against autism, who was embezzling money, with the help of his supervisor, a CDC official, Diana Shandell, and they were having an affair right out there in public. She was approving his invoices, for his expenditures, and she was also his lover. And then he went out and embezzled $1 million worth of money earmarked for vaccines and autism. He was never brought to justice. He fled the country. He's never been extradited. And that was just one example of, malfeasance stacked on fraud, stacked on interactions with big pharma. There were so many people that were so in bed with each other, including Julie Gerberding, who was the director of the CDC at the time, who, when she retired from the CDC in 2008, went straight away to work as the vice president of Merck and the president of their vaccine division. So there were so many things going on, to the tune of a $4 million signing bonus to join Merck. These are numbers that talk. And when you saw that and you looked it in the eye, it was really, really difficult to comprehend. And, I thought my brain was exploded. I was a very angry person when I found all of that out, especially given the, quote unquote collateral damage that my family and so many families were going through, because of this damage.
Well, and I get the money thing to a certain degree, especially if you're a middling, 20 years ago or 10 years ago, you're kind of this middling executive bureaucrat, you're making what, 150, 160 grand a year, maybe. And then someone's going to give you $4 million signing bonus, and heaven knows how much money after that per year for like ever. I remember Paul Alexander talking about how much money they were throwing at him to shut up, because he's an unbelievably outspoken guy. I think sometimes maybe a little bit too outspoken, but he's a passionate dude that really is fighting for primarily children's health. And they were throwing money at him. He was scared they're going to shoot him. And I'm like, you should be.
Yeah.
Precisely. And it was very difficult. It was very uncomfortable. I've been, even without the CDC whistleblower, I've been investigating the CDC, pretty much continuously since 2001. And in 2004, they blocked access for me to directly to talk to researchers, and said that I could only use the FOIA, so I could only use the Freedom of Information Act. I figured out what the maximum number of FOIA requests I could give, which is one a month, to the CDC. And I've done that monthly since that particular point in time. But, it's such a captured agency. Everybody is so lockstep there, and had been lockstep for such a long period of time. And there was so much money that was flowing back and forth. Even Thompson, he was getting retention bonuses. Dr. William Thompson, the whistleblower that finally came out to me, he got a retention bonus in order to keep him from talking about the fraud in the DiStefano study. And then after he became a whistleblower, in 2013 and 2014. Suddenly, after he made a public statement on August 24th, 2014, through his attorney, a whistleblower attorney. Guess what? Bill Thompson gets another retention bonus. So they paid him to shut up. And I'm sure they threatened him as well. He has not had contact with me since that point in time. Nothing, nada. I text him. I still have his number. And there's nothing. There are crickets back.
Wow.
No, it's
Wow. And so I so I'm going to kind of turn a little bit and say, you know, so the numbers obviously since 2001 have gone up 348%. Is it 1 in 31? And in your case, I mean, how could you? I mean, it's just a direct correlation with that MMR. You saw it. Yet, I was going to say, we're here. You know, you hear other things like, well, maybe it's the food, or maybe it's something else, the glyphosate, or maybe it's exposures and pesticides, etc. With trying to just leave your personal story aside, are you seeing things in the numbers that really explain this dramatic rise that logically just can't be, oh, we're just for a while it was like, oh, we're just getting better at diagnosing it. I'm like, no, we're not.
Yeah,
because how many people our generation are autistic?
Right. But that is a tiny part of it, because
no, I wanted to know though what he's found in his research, and I covered. I mean, is there any other potential links that we need to be looking at, or in your data, or have you even gone down that? Is it all seem to point specifically to the vaccines?
My wife coined a saying. I stole it, and that is, vaccines aren't the only way that you can get autism, but perhaps they're the best way to get autism. Because
Ouch.
I know completely unvaccinated kids who are severely autistic. Okay. So it happens, and it did happen. And when my son, even in his case, was such a hyper accumulator of toxic heavy metals, primarily mercury and aluminum, that were so prevalent in his vaccines. But he was also accumulating antimony from flame retardant child clothing. He was accumulating arsenic we had high arsenic in our water in Eastern Washington. There were other toxic exposures. I really worry about Roundup. I worry about glyphosate. But I do think that the delivery system of toxins by direct injection, where you have 100% absorption, is perhaps the most efficient way that you can. And then providing polysorbate 80 that will poke holes in the blood-brain barrier. It's a really great delivery system to jack up somebody's brain.
Yeah. One of the people that really helped me kind of reframe my entire thinking about all of this was Peter Abbe. So who did the work in Guinea-Bissau, got one of the DPT vaccines pulled from the WHO schedule because it killed little girls. Showed the effectiveness of the live measles vaccine, which is not on any Western country's vaccine schedule. And in Guinea-Bissau, which is overcrowded, poor, etc., that seemed to decrease all-cause mortality. So what was fascinating about that was they were the first people, at least that I know of, to actually show that vaccines have effects indirect, other than just preventing the disease they're using to vaccinate. So they give unvaccinated kids the live measles vaccine. Not only would they not die from measles, it would decrease their risk of dying from basically any infection for some reason. So then it also begs the converse, which is, if vaccines obviously have potentially good benefit that's secondary, they could obviously have bad effects that are secondary. But of course, it's just safe and effective, and you're crazy if you even ask the question. And so he did a beautiful short video. I don't even know where it was. I haven't been able to find it again. I wish I would have saved it. And he says, we have to stop looking at children's health and their immune system as a seek and destroy mission. It's not about trying to not get measles or about not trying to get chickenpox or whatever. It's about giving children the healthiest immune systems they can. And vaccines are immune modulators. So they should be used as such to give you a robust immune system. The other thing that's an immune modulator is an allergy shot, which you give to people so that they have less effect of the allergen. So I looked at that and I went, that's exactly it. What are we doing? Are we just, it's like, who cares if you don't get chickenpox if you get autism or if you get cancer from, simian virus 40 or like heaven knows what other things are there.
Right. I can't tell you how much respect I have for Dr. Aby. I followed his work for a long time. There's a whole chapter pretty much that's featured his work, especially regarding the DTP that still has the whole cell pertussis component in Guinea-Bissau. And he said a mouthful. He said, what so many of us have wanted to articulate for such a long time. I mean, if you look at delivering an antigen and stimulating a B cell response, and then, cheating with the goalposts and saying, yay, no chickenpox. When you've got, children that are falling apart from autism and, other autoimmune neurological conditions and a really, really suppressed innate immune system on top of it, it's fine. Yeah. Even Secretary Kennedy said, if you want to prevent the measles, the best way to prevent the measles is the MMR vaccine. But he didn't say that that was the best thing for immune health. He just said, yeah, okay, that. And that's a truism. It's true. It is true you can do that. But really, Dr. Aby, by stepping back and saying, let's create the most robust immune system that we can possibly can. And then other people like Yehuda Schoenfeld, who's looked at autoimmunity specifically around aluminum, around HPV vaccine, and so forth, that have looked at, the consequences regarding immune health and vaccination. That's really, I love it when science goes and makes these conclusions that are so much more scientific than, you got to prevent the boogeyman.
Right. Well, no, I think what Secretary Kennedy said about measles is an exact corollary to saying the fastest way to prevent divorce is to murder your spouse.
Oh, wow, that's nice. I was going to say prevent burglary is just burn down your house.
Well, same thing.
But whatever.
But...
I want to go to the whole narrative of let's celebrate neurodiversity.
Oh, brother, let's
celebrate autism. And I mean, there's some people whose, children are mildly on the spectrum. Will promote that and are excited because they're getting more attention and this is great. But then I think of you and what you're going through personally and your son. I can't even imagine how that is just so frustrating. I can't, I'm thinking of the words that I would I want to cuss on here, but like to you, that must be just like piss you off literally, because it's like, I'm not celebrating this at all. Look what's happened to my child. And so what do you think with that narrative? Is it a distraction to not have to like research and look at it more? Is it just an excuse to explain it away? Any thoughts on that?
All of the above. And, it's an excuse, it's a distraction, and it is, so infuriating and frustrating to rail up against that, to show, this is really, what the, without, for lack of a better term, I guess, the bottom end of the spectrum looks like, and I understand, everybody's an innate need to be able to have an identity and identify with something. And if you've got a high functioning autism diagnosis, it's almost like the pop psychology of the 80s. Now I get to be a codependent, or whatever. So then you
Right.
get your moniker, and it's like, great, I have a moniker, I've arrived. That's not what low functioning autism is. My son can communicate now. He's a speller. He uses a modality called spelling to communicate, and he can point out on a letterboard, and for the last 15 months has been able to communicate openly with us. He thinks autism is a scourge. He hates that he's autistic. He hates that he can't speak. He hates that he's in pain. And so, to see, these, yes, is there a part of an identity for him? Yeah, absolutely. He can get together with other non-speakers and they can communicate and they can talk about, their struggles and woes and everything. But ultimately, his dream is not to be what he is right now, which is suffering, and from limitations, from immobility, from a body that betrays himself, and from the stark area of loneliness because of inability to communicate.
We don't have a lot of dead air on this show, but boy, I'm having a hard time getting another question because being parents, it's just like, again, you're right. Like, it's the word you would cut your own heart out for your kids.
Oh,
and
yeah.
and then to see that, and like I mean, the way you described it initially, the atomic bomb that blows up in your life every single day. I mean,
And I
there's
guess,
no better
this maybe
description.
not be even sort of topic. Maybe we're going to go down today's discussion, but I'm thinking, and I don't know how much research you've done on the cures, treatments,
Mm-hmm.
all the things. I mean, I can imagine you have, because there's so many things that we hear, every corner, from the gut microbiome to research in biochemistry, supplements, to, oh, it's, you just are lacking this, and if you replace that, or chelation, to,
Right.
it never ends. And I'm sure it's just not one thing, but the grasping at straws kind of feeling, the wanting to cure, reverse, even some improvement. I mean, how that can be just consume families. I mean, I can
Mm-hmm.
imagine what it does to marriages. And like, when does it, I guess, not stop's not the right word, but it just kind of reminds me of people doing the IVF route. Even, it's just like, you you always want to never stop looking for the cure in this situation, and
Right.
and doing things to help. What has that been like for you? And
Well,
how do you divide your time between your mission that you were started with, and that?
those are really good questions. It does, consume such a great amount of time. And I'm thankful for the research that's been done, especially around neuroplasticity,
Mm-hmm.
because we did have so many sort of developmental specialists, especially right when my son was diagnosed, who were like, oh, go on a cruise, leave your kid at home. I mean, give up. Basically, we had several practitioners that just were like, give up. This is as good as it gets. And that was so difficult to see, such a, you cannot describe the love of a parent for a child. Uh, you know, I always wanted to be a dad. I always wanted to be a dad. I wanted to be a dad of a son. And, I have an only child who's a son. I felt blessed. So there's nothing that you would not do for that child. So my house has been the house of many clinical trials for my son. I feel for people that don't have the knowledge base and the knowledge background for me, because there's so many different things. There's snake oil, there's cures that worked for one kid,
Mm-hmm.
or for a very very small fraction, and for those small fractions of kids, God bless them, and I'm grateful, that happened for those kids. But you just sort of, brush yourself and move on, look at your limitations, and do the best that you can possibly do. we did not discover, the ability to like spell to communicate until my son was 23. And we did it. And ultimately, it's the best intervention we've ever done with him. It took, though, working on his gut, it took detoxifying him of heavy metals. And we did so much foundational work that in hindsight, now I'm really grateful for, because when my son was like 15, 16 years old, he did not have the ability to regulate his body to do something like spelling, and so it's made the difference. I tell parents not to give up, but I also tell parents to be able to vet the results, of, the particular interventions that they're considering, and to be as reasonable as possible. One of the things that I want to see, and is starting to happen with the organization that I currently work for, is Children's Health Defense, is to be able to help evaluate these technologies scientifically, to give more evidence for parents who are making these choices, by necessity. So it's a tough road. I don't want parents to give up on therapies. I do not think that there's an age that a child ages out and that's as good as it gets. Because really the advances that I've seen in my own son, have been primarily in the last 4 years.
That's super encouraging.
Yes.
And I love the fact that CHD is looking at the therapy side.
Right.
Because there's no more fertile ground for grifters and charlatans than when you have a desperate parent. And I mean, the fleecing that you can do to a desperate parent, I mean, there is so many scoundrels out there, and that's a very nice word, which I would never usually say.
But you see it everywhere. It's like
it's all over the place,
Right. And I've been fleeced. My family's been fleeced. We've been, I've poured snake oil down my son's throat. It happens, and it's unfortunate. But you lick your wounds and you move on with that, and then you learn a lesson of like, being able to be measured while being eternally hopeful. Love always hopes and love always perseveres. But you also have to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. And so, having wisdom aside, the hope that springs, with new developments is really, really essential. And then when you get duped and it doesn't work, don't stay in that space. I mean, yeah, everybody gets burned, right? So, some scams are a lot more sophisticated than, marrying a Nigerian princess online.
True.
Oh man, your humor, I love it.
So where do you want to go next, May? I think we should talk about what's going on right now, because we've had, so many people cheering and excited when Bobby was confirmed, and then of course the inevitable hangover after the wedding ceremony of you actually have to make the sausage, as they say in political speak, and you actually have to get things done politically. And I have completely changed my mind. I was 100% pro-vax. I thought that they were the most studied things in the world, which clearly they weren't. I did my own research. I'm, a physician of 33 years. I understand this. Completely changed my mind. So my concern, and I understand what's going on. Like today, they just came out and they said they're not recommending the COVID. They're not going to approve anymore. The FDA is not going to approve any more COVID shots for anyone under 65 unless they have a bunch of these caveats, which include,
I missed that.
Everything basically.
Right.
So it's kind of weak. And second of all, the solution to that problem is not a recommendation from the FDA, because the FDA's recommendations do nothing. I have a medical license. That's on me. They need to just pull the damn thing. America spends more on healthcare than any other country, yet we rank 48th in life expectancy. We spend trillions, but 200,000 insured people still declare medical bankruptcy every year. Clearly, the system is broken. But what if there was a way to take back control, to break free from inflated costs and red tape? That's exactly why Crowd Health was created, a smarter, more transparent way to pay for healthcare. No middleman, no bureaucracy, just a community of people helping each other when it matters most. Join the revolution. Go to joincrowdhealth.com and use promo code BSFREE for a discount on your first 3 months, because your health should be in your hands, not theirs. Now, I understand that the political, getting things done politically is entirely different than getting things done in your family or your county or your school or whatever.
Right.
So
Right.
where do you see the issues here moving forward so we can do what, you and I and May agree is the lowest hanging common sense fruit in the world?
Well, first of all, I really am encouraged by the progress that, and I'm going to call him by his official title because I worked hard for this, and even texted
Yes.
me when he got confirmed. He's like, yeah, thank you. You helped me get here. So Secretary Kennedy um, has done a great job with sort of the, oh my goodness. There, if you could pile every bad metaphor in that he's grabbed onto right now, a tiger by the tail, 1,000 tentacles, that manta ray that killed Steve Irwin. I mean, with that shooting thing that went through his heart. That's what Bobby has grabbed onto, and he's had, thousands of deep state enemies within HHS ranks. And then all of a sudden he's the boss. He's over top of them. And so, there are no lack of saboteurs, within his field of view and especially behind his back. So he's doing the absolute best that he can possibly do in taking the steps that he needs to do in order to dismantle the damage that has been done. So when I see any type of gains, vis-a-vis the children's COVID shots that have never been FDA approved, they're only emergency use authorized and no longer recommending those, or no longer recommending new COVID shots, or no longer recommending specifically Novavax vaccines. I mean, that came down. I see all of this increment as, laying a foundation for where he needs to go next. And when I hear, the insiders talk, the ones that are in the administration, God bless them. I did not want to go. I've worked for the government before. I worked for a federal laboratory before I came to the university. And so I'd rather amputate my foot with my own teeth than work for the federal agency.
Right.
So seeing everything that he has come up against, and seeing the measured response that he's taken, over and over and over again, I'm so encouraged. I trust him really implicitly and have worked side by side with him since 2015, as a science advisor, and, on an almost daily basis. So we've developed a lot of trust. And I know that he's in it for the long game. He has the appropriate advisors by his side. And, and he's also working with an administration who, frankly, during the first term of Trump, he had Azar, he had Gottlieb, he had all these pharma insiders. So change is really going to take a lot of time, a lot of convincing, and yield a lot of results. And so, I'm so encouraged, by that. I'm so encouraged that he's looking at autism causation and leaving everything on the table, despite the Bill Cassidys of the world. You saw in the hearing where, Bill Cassidy was, dangling by a string, this confirmation. And it's like, yes, will you say the magic words, vaccines don't cause
Yeah,
autism?
exactly.
And it was like, it was like he was joining the Elks or the Moose Lodge or the Freemasons by saying this oath and watching Bobby stand his ground. I mean, I was in tears. It was absolutely amazing.
No, well, because we have lived in a vacuum of leadership and a vacuum of character. When you actually see leadership and character, it's like, it's water in the middle of the desert. I mean,
Right.
it's
Right.
exactly what it is.
And I was just gonna say, to your point and to our listeners hearing this, I think it's really important because, people think so someone new gets in power and they've heard him speak in the past, about the agenda and the importance of the vaccines, and that's going to be something addressed. But then power flips, and all of a sudden, all you hear about it was, well, let's get rid of the red food dye and the Fruit Loops and the Doritos, and people are scrambling. It's like, well, oh no, we've been duped. He doesn't care about vaccines or the COVID stuff at all, because now we're talking about stuff like, well, it's just minutia compared
Okay.
to that. And so I think, to your point, it's like, and what Tim is saying is there's baby steps to take, and there's back stuff happening, right? That
Right.
you have to incrementally get things done in a way that works politically. I mean, he's from a political family. He knows how the system works, and you can't just, okay, first day we're tackling this, and there's a way for it to unravel. There's a system so that things can get done.
Well,
and doesn't mean he's dismissed the whole vaccine
no,
topic,
of course,
correct?
no,
Even though people are like,
absolutely
well,
not.
what happened? It's just
Yeah.
like, no, nothing. Yeah.
Well, if you want to guarantee that people take every single vaccine that comes out, no matter what, ban them. Just wholesale ban them. You have to have a cultural shift. And this reminds me of one of the most beautiful stories I've ever heard in my life about Christian missionaries. So this the son of a guy I knew who was like a patriarch in InterVarsity Christian Fellowship when I used to work at camps a million years ago. His
Very
son was
cool.
a missionary to Nepal, and he spent a year digging wells, building homes, and just learning the culture of the people he was embedded with before he ever said anything about a church, about Jesus, or the Bible. Because he knew if they didn't see his heart and trust who he was and who the animating spirit was in him, then he was just an empty banging gong.
Right.
And it's that
Yeah,
whole
well
business.
said.
Like, if you want to make sure that no one comes to your church, go to your neighbors and scream, "You're burning in hell. You need to come to church with me." And so, like, I look at it as exactly the same way. Like, I go to work and I work with colleagues that wildly disagree with me. The approach to that is not to go, "Vaccines cause autism. You're poisoning your patients." It's to say,
Yeah.
what about that COVID vax? Like, would you actually take another booster after what I mean, you
Right.
have to angle your arguments in a way that the listener can hear. And if you
Mhm.
don't, you're just obnoxious.
Well, I love that story, by the way. I mean, I think that is such, it's such a representation of, the golden rule, the fundamentals that, God created people. And so God knows how to win over people. And it's not to let them know that they're going to burn in hell the first day that you meet them. Even if it's an object lesson, you could build a bonfire in their front yard and say, "This is you." Not going to work. Not going to work. No, you can mow their lawn. You can, bring them dinner, when a loved one's in the hospital. There's so many things, and I see, Bobby, as what he's doing right now is acts of service. I mean, it's completely acts of service. When he inherited this, he's not the dictator of HHS; he's a secretary. I mean, that's even
Right.
that's like a less than a director. I mean, he's the secretary of HHS, and so he is really serving that agency well, and he's serving the Trump administration very, very well, and he hasn't changed his spots in any way, shape, or form. That that doesn't go by the wayside. But he has he has 6 kids. I didn't know that he has 6 kids. Like, wow, you must have a lot of patience.
Yeah.
He does have infinite patience, and he wasn't going to transform this in 24 hours, because if that was
Right.
his mindset, then he would have been a flash in a pan, and he would have been the person who was rejected and kicked out on his ear. He's in it for the long game.
Well, and I had this conversation with one of my friends who's a chiropractor, and I said, I think he's already won. And the reason I think that is, if you look at, smoking cigarettes and how we took that from 50, 60, 70% of the population to 20%, there was some government stuff. There was some legislation, most of it local. But
Right.
ultimately what it was a cultural shift. It became uncool to smoke. And so you're not going to change how people think about vaccines or health or glyphosate or pick your poison, literally, by pounding it into their heads with legislation. It's going to come because you have a cultural shift. And just getting Bobby confirmed was a cultural earthquake, in my opinion. And this will spawn thousands and hundreds of thousands of other very courageous warriors when they see this long game and they see actual change. That's what I think.
Again, can you guys be my best friends for like a long time? Is that okay? This is,
Of course.
there's such wisdom here, and but so many people's hearts and minds are changed, and so many people have permission to really come out of hiding, because of Secretary Kennedy getting confirmed. Because of Jay Bhattacharya, who was, the ire of Tony Fauci, during the COVID era. So many people are now being given permission to, own up to the truth, and sort of break off sort of this, almost curse that has been, in the medical profession. And there were so many opportunities in COVID because we saw the whole megapoly overplay its hand, and that has not fallen to the ground. People like Bobby Kennedy are not going to let that go to waste. We see the ridiculousness now, and so many people now are seeing it and can't unsee it. So, that I really feel like there was a lot of divine intervention. There was a lot of carnage. People died from the COVID vaccine, and were jacked up in droves. But which is really too bad. But it did create an opportunity for, like you said, this cultural shift.
Yeah, we're getting very close to the end here. There's one quote I want to read just so that people understand exactly what we're fighting against. John Leake, who we've had on our show,
He's
works
great.
with Peter great guy, great writer. He's talking about he quotes this from the medical journal Blood. From 1998 to 2013, pharmaceutical lobbying interests were 42% larger than the second highest paying industry, health insurance. The $2.7 billion effort almost equaled the combined contributions of big oil, $1.3 billion, and the defense industry, $1.5 billion. An even greater financial commitment is made to advertising. The United States and New Zealand are the only two countries that allow prescription medications to be advertised on television. In 2012, nearly $3.5 billion was invested in the United States in pharmaceutical marketing. That's 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
For every dollar spent on research, an average of greater than $2, sometimes up to $19, is spent on marketing. 9 out of 10 large pharmaceutical companies spend more on marketing than on research and development. 9 of 10 spend more on marketing. That's what we're fighting. I really want those ads off TV so badly. I mean, maybe it's time to rent my garments and fast, because that would really change the focus.
Oh yeah. I don't know, how I get introduced to Ozempic, Mojaric, Wellbutrin, Viagra, Cialis, now the knockoff generics that are so wonderful. It sucks you in. It's horrible. It's absolutely, and I'm guilty of like zoning out the commercial, and then at the very end they say, and oh, by the way, I lost a little weight, and they look, they do the head turn, and so it's very, very effective, but it needs to all go away. Oh my goodness.
Amen to
we can't think. We can't think straight, with all this advertising noise. When the post-marketing surveillance for adverse events is not only woefully inadequate, but it's also buried the likes of people like Pfizer, who wanted all their post-marketing surveillance data to be sealed for 76 years. It's incredible.
That doesn't say guilt at all.
No. Oh, they're, they just didn't want to waste our time, right? Pfizer, they're as pure as the driven snow. Serial felons.
Look at their history.
Other than the fact that they own the second highest criminal penalty fine in the United States. The number one was the BP oil spill. Number two was Pfizer for Bextra and Vioxx or whatever it was.
Right.
Well, not those are yeah, I think Bextra.
Right.
Let's wind this up with a couple quick questions. I think, don't you think?
Sure.
Go for it.
What's one question every doctor should ask about rising childhood, health conditions? Or if I'm asking my colleagues, what should I ask them? Like, hey, come on. I love what Bobby says. We're spending 4.7 trillion and are sicker than anybody. I mean, no one has answered that question. So do you have a question about autism that I could use on my colleagues?
I think Tim meant we're seeing massive rises in celiac disease and asthma and
type 1 diabetes.
So, scientifically, what should, people are just, instead of listening to the narrative, as a thinking scientist, what should be questioning? Any thoughts?
I think that you really need to bring them to reality of like, what do you think that we give on the CDC schedule 24 needle sticks through the first birthday? And did you know that the vaccines at 2 months, 4 months, and 6 months that you all given together have never been tested together? What do you think about that? That was really astounding to me. That's the sort of infant pincushion syndrome, and that really caused me to take pause, and I've used that on a lot of practitioners myself, who are very pro-vaccine, to say, well, did you know those never been tested in combination? What do you think about that? There is no double-blind placebo-controlled study, for, first of all, any vaccine. I do love the birth. If you want to disarm somebody a piece at a time, the weakest link in the armor is the birth Hep B.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It is the birth Hep B. And I've had people argue with me and blue in the face about, the incidence and possibility of transmission of hepatitis B among infants.
What?
And
where are they hanging out?
Well, yeah, the infant brothel and
Oh.
IV drug abuse problem in this country is off the chain, obviously.
Oh yeah, condoms in every nursery. Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
every church nursery should have condoms.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm
No.
sorry I said that.
Yeah,
No, that's
that's
perfect. You
That's
get the
okay.
vibe.
spectacular.
Yeah. No. I like to lead with sort of
Yeah.
that sort of preposterous nature of what we're doing.
Mhm.
In Vax Unvax, the second chapter of the book is devoted to the health of completely unvaccinated children.
Mhm.
And some of my papers have gone through sort of post peer review surveillance, because they came back and said this couldn't be right. The rate of ear infections in your 1-year-old children is only 19%. The national average is between 60 and 80%. And I'm like, sorry, that's the health of the unvaccinated. I mean, give me another example of 60 to 80% in completely unvaccinated children, and we can talk.
But again,
Love it.
it gets back to Peter Abbe. Are we building an immune system that's robust and healthy, or are we
Yes.
destroying it by freaking it out with all of these adjuvants and vaccines?
Precisely. I
So,
mean, the aluminum level alone is just enough to make your head spin.
so where can people follow your work and get your book?
The best place for people to follow my work is at childrenshealthdefense.org.
Mhm.
There's whole tabs for science, and we have sort of a sub-web environment for all of our goodies. And then also, there is a tab on the childrenshealthdefense.org that features the Vax Unvax book. You just have to scroll down to the bottom, and you can buy it at most major booksellers online. And it was a privilege to write a book with Bobby Kennedy. I heard him swear under his breath at me at several times because I write like a nerdy scientist, but I highly recommend the book, not only because I'm a co-author, as a handbook, because it has so many quick facts and figures and information that you can get on the fly about just about every vaccine, as well as vaccinated compared to completely unvaccinated.
Perfect.
Great. We'll put those links in our show notes. Thanks for all the work you've done. And, I just want to say, obviously, you didn't come into this work just because you're a scientist and an intelligent guy to be a whistleblower. But, for most of these people, it comes down to, you're a father, you're someone, believe that there's truth out there, you're going to find it. And, what your has found and what we're hearing it's totally heartbreaking. But thanks for staying the fight, hanging in there, what you're doing. And I can just hope that there's more hope that the tides will change, that what you're doing will cause a revolution, an eye-opening, and a major health change for the kids, for our country. And so honored to have you on our show. Thanks for sharing your story and all the work you've done. And I just want to tell everybody to please share this episode with someone because there's going to be someone that needs to hear it. And thanks for listening to BS Free, where the truth might be sometimes uncomfortable, heartbreaking, emotional, but we love to put it out there for you. Until next time, stay bold, stay curious, and never stop thinking for yourself.